What I see the greatest speakers in the world doing, they spend a lot of time and attention really understanding who the audience is. So even if they, for example, are kind of reusing 70, 80% of a signature speech or a signature keynote, they are able to really listen and make sure that they've tailored it to where it meets the needs of that audience.
Welcome to the podcast that helps speakers and writers like you grow their impact and income. This is Stage, Page, and Screen. I am going to throw something fun your way during our conversation.
I love fun things.
I'm going to have you critique one of my TED Talks in real time.
Ooh, okay. I'm all about it.
Yes.
Let's do it.
And be brutal. I mean, feel free to just spend most of the time making fun of me.
Okay.
So when I think about a good speech, I kind of think about 4 quadrants. I'm looking for laughter. I'm looking for tears. I'm looking to give hope. And I'm looking to give tools. Is there anything similar, sort of a checklist that maybe you operate off of when you're working with a client, when you're seeing them give the initial sort of versions of that speech to know how close that speech is to being ready for the big stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have kind of very similar, most things I have fallen into one of those 4 buckets. I've kind of distilled down that there's like 12 questions you need to ask within your speech to just make sure. And a lot of them are, do I have stories? Do I have humor? Tools, I imagine, call to action. A lot of times what we do with our speeches is they can be great, but then the audience can leave feeling confused, like, well, what do I do with what I heard? So it's so important to have like, okay, what is your audience going to do with what they've heard? And I think one of the just biggest ones, kind of overarching, like the bigger umbrella, kind of over all of those 4, from my perspective, is what is the point of the speech? What's the one clear controlling idea that this speech has? So if everyone walks away knowing what was it about? Because that drives the stories you tell. It drives, how you bring out those tears or that emotional connection with the audience. It drives the kind of tools that you're giving your audience and just really knowing who your audience is. I think a lot of times, what I see the greatest speakers in the world doing, they spend a lot of time and attention really understanding who the audience is. So even if they, for example, are kind of reusing 70, 80% of a signature speech or a signature keynote, one that they've given again and again and again, they are able to really listen and understand who the audience is and make sure that they've tailored it to where it meets the needs of that audience.
Okay. I want to nerd out on that. This idea of contextualization, because I get it. I agree with your basic point. I've also seen speakers, well-intended, who want to customize so much. Or sometimes they'll hear from the client, hey, it's really important that you consider who our audience is, speak to these particular problems. And it sometimes seems like the client is saying, hey, can you contextualize your signature keynote like 20%? But the speaker hears, can you contextualize your signature keynote 80%? And then they rework so many aspects of it that a lot of what made it an incredible keynote and why they got booked sort of gets lost. So that's a bit of a rant to get to this question, which is how much sort of contextualizing and obviously recognizing the audience that you're speaking to and the problems they're going through do you want to use versus this story is hilarious, it ends at a poignant point, it has a great applicable idea, and I know this works, so I want to be careful not to mess with it too much?
That's a great question. So I believe that every speaker should have 4 different keynotes that they can give. And so when you're asked from an event or, your buddy at the chamber, wherever you're asked to speak, your friend's company, when you're asked to speak, instead of kind of having that tendency to reinvent the wheel every time, having a few choices, I suggest having 4, but 3 or 4 choices you turn back and say, hey, these are my topics. Which one would you like? And to your point, listening to the unique needs, but I would say as a general rule, 15 to 20%. But once you've dialed in the stories, once you've dialed in the jokes, once you've dialed in those different pieces and they work, don't change it just based on what, event organizer. No, take what you know is your best and deliver it to the audience, knowing that it's worked before in the past. I also feel like, though, within that, there's always opportunity that maybe you have been wanting to try out a new story or a new joke. And based on what that person asked you to speak on, it makes you think of something that's happened recently that you've been wanting to test out anyway. But the biggest thing is to not just reinvent your speech every single time you're asked to speak, because that can be a lot of work. It can be a lot of effort. And to your point, a lot of times you're being asked because maybe they heard you give that speech before, or they watched your speaker's reel that you have on your website, or whatever the thing is, and they're kind of expecting that talk or that level. And so making sure that you deliver on what they've asked you to speak about. And also you can like kind of push back a little bit. So if somebody says, hey, we'd really like you to talk about this, 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 and this, and this, and you're looking at it going, okay, that's not the speech that I have prepared, that I have time. Maybe I don't have the timeline to do it. Maybe I feel the energy to create this whole new thing. Maybe I don't. But you can always go back and say, hey, what I heard you say from that is you would really like me to leave your audience with this. I think it would work well within here. And you can always kind of adapt based on that.
Yes, agreed 100%. I want to get nerdy on some of these aspects we talked about, the humor, the laughter, those moments of emotion. As a speaker is getting a new talk up on its feet, it's pretty good. It's not yet great. What kind of sort of like measurable or visual cues are you looking for from the audience to know, okay, this is at a good place? Again, I'm very nerdy about all these things. So as an example, something like a joke, if I'm speaking to 100 people and it seems like about 10 people, 10% of the audience laughed, I might say that is not quite yet at the benchmark that I'm looking for. If I have something that I think is a really compelling idea on a slide, I'm talking to 100 people, only 10 people pull out their phone to take a photo of that slide, I go, there's something not yet clear enough or compelling enough about that idea. So I'm curious, are there any sort of measurable things you use to set up benchmarks for the speakers and clients you're working with to know when a particular aspect of the speech is in fighting shape?
That's a great question. Well, so there's only so much you can do in practice before you deliver it. And as you indicated, hey, if 10 people laugh or if 10 people pull out their phone, like, is that enough? Audience engagement can be such a fascinating thing, can it? I mean, you've spoken a lot where sometimes it feels like, oh, maybe that wasn't my best. And then people are lining up to talk to you afterwards. And other times you feel like I nailed that. And then you're kind of like looking, going, hey, where's the line to talk to me about my talk? And so I do think some of it, feedback is one of the best ways. So obviously you have the in the moment feedback that you were just saying, like you tell the joke, people laugh or they don't laugh. You share the slide, people take out their camera or they don't take out the camera. But sometimes that can be really hard as a speaker in the moment to really, because you're not in the audience experiencing it. So one of the ways that I think can be very insightful, one is every single time that you can, video yourself giving the speech, even if that's your friend in the corner with their iPhone and it's not this professionally done thing, but rewatch your video after you've spoken, not immediately following, but, watch the game tape and see like, okay, well, when did people laugh? Why did they laugh? And kind of like, to nerd out, I love troubleshooting and figuring out like, okay, why was that funny? Or why in this crowd did everybody laugh? And why was I maybe not as exaggerated or animated as I said it? Was my pausing off? So kind of like evaluating, especially if something didn't work, instead of just being like, well, I'm never going to use that joke again, or that story doesn't work. Go, well, is the story didn't work? Does the humor doesn't work? Or is just like the way that I told it, did that not work? And so as far as like, I always tell my clients too, I believe a lot in having, as far as humor specifically, pocket humor. So having some humor ideas if your humor doesn't land, what is going to be, because oftentimes we even see this with speakers we've seen, even sometimes comedians, if the first thing doesn't land, they come back with something that's actually funnier.
Yes.
And so I encourage my clients, have some pocket humor. So for myself, even if I'm speaking, I just kind of have a few pre-planned jokes about technology. Like if technology doesn't work, because technology sometimes doesn't work, your video doesn't fire, your mic doesn't work, your clicker doesn't advance, whatever the situation situation is what could be just a pocket joke you could just pull of like, oh, I guess my technology, like my kids, doesn't listen to me. It's not overly funny, but your goal of humor doesn't have
That
to be
actually
tears
makes me
streaming down
cry.
the face.
That hits too close to
Jokes.
home.
I
I didn't
know,
find that
right?
funny. I didn't find that funny.
That
That
was
was
not amusing.
my goodness.
But having some of those just kind of like pocket things, or like let's say you're giving the presentation and you have a slide that fires and you realize I have a typo, like a real bad typo on that slide, or you notice something, or like, wow, I like kind of have some like pocket jokes of like, oh, if my slide, has a lot of like, oh, my slide's much like me, has a few too many words on it. Just like having a little like a self-awareness goes so far for being relatable and authentic to your audience. And having pre-thought, it sounds funny, like pre-think jokes you may or may not tell,
Hmm.
but just
Hmm.
thinking through, like, let's say you are trying a new story, a new joke, and like you think it slays, you've told it to a few people, they all find it really funny, and then you get on the stage and it just for whatever reason just was like a little flat. Just kind of have just what is my mental recovery plan going to be from it? Because one of the worst things that we can all see is the speaker that's on the stage, they tell the joke and then they don't know how to recover from it, but if they're like, well, if they have a funny line, then it's like, they're like, well, my wife appreciated that one, or
Yeah.
going to tell my husband that joke didn't work. It was his idea. Or, it doesn't have to be this huge, like super funny thing, but just kind of that lightness and a self-awareness goes so far as a speaker. Don't take
Mm.
yourself so seriously on the stage. I mean, take the craft of it seriously, put the time, the intention into your content and your delivery, but just remember to not take yourself too seriously. Have a sense of humor about the fact that you're speaking, that you're up on the stage, that you're doing the best that you can. And I think that goes a really long way, especially on humor. And I think people appreciate that you've tried to be amusing, even if your humor didn't quite land.
I think Conan O'Brien is a great example for folks to study and watch. He is the master of commenting on the weakness of a delivery or landing of a joke, such that often his real-time critiquing of his jokes is funnier than the actual joke itself.
Well, exactly. And so much of humor, I mean, Conan O'Brien, and you look at pretty much if you've gone to any comedy shows and seen comedians live, one of the things that makes humor so engaging for any of us is so much of humor is situational. And so as a speaker, sometimes we can be like waiting for our time to speak or getting ready to get up. And we're kind of like whatever your mental rehearsal is, but we're not even just like looking at being like, oh, this room shape is a really weird room shape. Like maybe, it's one of those ones with round tables, but it's like very long and shallow, or maybe the stage has a kind of like weird layout. Or so if you can be like point out the obvious, the situational thing that we're all experiencing together, that can really add a lot of humor to your presentation, instead of being so like focused on what you're saying. It's just like situational humor goes a long way. Like point out something, or like let's say recently I was watching a speaker, and the venue that he was at, there's a lot of construction going outside, and so there's like this super like huge crane that was sort of like out the window, and it was like being really loud, and it was like moving steel beams, and
Perfect.
instead of just I've seen speakers do two things. Like one, you're just ignoring it, pretending like it's not there, like trying to get the focus back in. But what this speaker chose to do is like, oh, let's all pause and look and pretend that we're 3-year-old boys interested in construction, and he turned and he just like made a thing of it. We laughed, and it was kind of like that, just him having that self-awareness, like that this crazy thing is happening outside of me. Or, if somebody's, another one of my clients last week, who lives in Atlanta, was giving a speech and somebody's ringtone went off in a very serious, poignant moment of his talk. Someone, there's still those people out there that forget to turn off the ringtone. We don't know how we've made it to 2023, but there's still those people that have their ringtone on. So a gentleman in the audience, his ringtone, which was, like the Georgia chant, went off, like, and so he just made a joke about it, so it's like this thing happened in the room. Instead of just ignoring it and like barreling through as a speaker, being like, he's like, go dogs, let's all just take a moment, and like, even though it kind of like wrecked up his flow, but just having that like nimbleness, I think is what makes speakers truly great, is not getting so locked in that like, this is my speech, this is the way I'm giving it, but just like awareness of, I'm in a room full of people in real life time. Things are going to happen in the audience, in the room around me, and I'm going to be nimble and accepting of those.
It seems like the tension that's in the audience then gets not only released, but it's like, okay, we're safe. The speaker recognizes these things. We're safe in this room because that has been acknowledged. Otherwise, the tension just builds and builds and builds and builds and becomes more and more distracting. And I love that. Yeah, having the
Exactly.
pocket joke. Yeah.
A two-part question sort of in this same category. How do we add in humor if we're not funny? Question one. And how do we add in heart if we're not, such as myself, empathetic?
Oh, okay. So are you funny? How do you add in humor? Can I
He's not
try?
very funny.
The humor is no problem.
Okay. The
That's
heart,
easy. The
you can
heart,
laugh your way through. Okay.
that's like a chore for me. I can do it, but that's a chore.
Well, let's talk about humor first. So, a few natural ways, stories, tell stories, personal stories, funny stories. One of the biggest ways, what happens for a lot of us is, and again, you might be listening to this podcast and your presentations are in front of 6 people at work, or it might be, big crowds. But what happens to a lot of us is we're asked to give the presentation, whatever our timeline is. Maybe we have an hour to prepare it. Maybe we have 10 hours to prepare it. Maybe we have, 3 months. And we are like, man, I need to be funny. Ooh, I need to add some humor. And then don't go down the Google train of like, okay, well, maybe I can find a meme or maybe I can Google a joke. I mean, it's not, you can sometimes find some last minute things that are just great there, but I encourage everybody to keep a humor file on your phone or a funny file. And so just on the notes app on your phone, if you're more analog and always carry a notebook, that's fine too. Or if you use Slick apps, that's fine, but just notes, just write funny file. And as funny or little interesting things happen to you throughout the day, just jot a little bit of a note to trigger the idea later. So then when you are looking to add humor to your presentation, you can glance back on this whole long list. And if nothing else, it'll kind of spark some of those humor ideas. I write like little, I work a lot and I have 4 kids. And so I grocery shop a lot and I, shuttle kids from place to place. So I go to Costco a lot. So for example, just the other day, I was at Costco and, there was all these like doormats, for outside of your door, to walk in your door or whatever. And they had like little teacups on them. And it was like, welcome to our home or whatever. I mean, I live in the South. And the woman next to me was like, well, we really know it's all in the teacups. Like we know it's really in the teacups. And it was funny. It was just like the random stranger was like, ooh, maybe that could be a funny, like little line. Or, my daughter's getting ready to go to her little preschool program, had yoga. And so she was telling me about her yogurt teacher. And it was like, okay, like, but these little funny little things, or at work, a great way to use humor is callbacks. So what is funny that's happened in the room from a speaker before you, or something else that you can call back, like leaning into someone else's humor. Some other humor techniques that are just fun beyond just kind of having that awareness and start jotting things down. The rule of 3 can be a really effective humor technique. And this is when you list 2 expected things followed by something unexpected. So like maybe I would say, 2022 was a really hard year. There was massive inflation. There was still a lot of, political unrest in Ukraine. And was season 3 of Ted Lasso ever going to come out? So it's like kind of an unexpected, like, oh, people weren't expecting that to be in that list, which thank God
that's
the
why I
season
have
did come
booze
out.
in my teacup. I kept waiting for
Yeah,
it.
exactly. So there you go. So,
Believe.
but just looking, and there's so much to learn about humor. I think we get intimidated. Some of us that you're naturally funny, but for those that feel like maybe they're not as naturally funny, they instantly, when they think of humor, they think of jokes. And so, but I'm not talking about jokes. Humor is not jokes. It can be jokes if that's your style. I have seen speakers slay dad jokes. I've seen speakers slay knock knock jokes. I've seen all the gamut of it, where I was like, I would never even try a joke. But by humor, I just mean a levity. It's a lightness. It's a general sense of lightness to your content. I've worked with speakers and I kind of agree on this on a lot of topic. You should be thinking about adding some level of levity every 3 to 5 minutes of your presentation. And again, not a joke, but just a general sense of lightness, a general sense of self-awareness. So I would say that's some of it. And then you just learn. I love the book. Have you read the book Humor Seriously?
Oh, yes.
Have you?
Outstanding.
It's an outstanding book just about how can we use humor more creatively in the workplace. And the book is funny as well, but they also have a lot of other humor techniques in there as well. And then on heart, I think it's important at this point, Josh, we need to ask, why do you have no feelings? Why do
Well,
you have no heart?
I grew up in foster care. I was abandoned by my biological parents. I have a general sense of bitterness and self-protection about the world, and so that's why it's difficult. I
Okay.
will say all of my speeches are emotional,
Yeah.
but that is because I'm a masterful presenter, not because I'm a healthy person. It is a quadrant of the speech I recognize is important to connect with a particular percentage of the audience, and so I very in a very calculated way. This all sounds terrible, but this is 100% honest. In a very calculated way, sort of intentionally plan a moment of vulnerability in the service of the message.
Yeah. And that's a great, planning it in for both humor and heart. One of the best avenues to draw those out is from personal stories. That's also one of the best ways to authentically connect with your audience, to express some of that vulnerability. I think what happens though in storytelling, and I post about storytelling a lot on LinkedIn just because I love the topic. But a lot of times, what happens when we are telling stories is two problems that happen. One is we tell them very factual. We're not actually telling stories. We're just giving a series of facts of what happened. This happened, and then this happened, this other thing happened, and then this was the result. But if you can really think through your stories and adding in the dimension of when this experience happened, what did I feel? And when this experience happened, what did I think? So, for example, let's say that you have recently purchased a new home. Well, you could give all the details of like, oh, I live in Nashville and we bought a home in this neighborhood. And the process was stressful because the market is crazy, la, 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 la. But if you were to add in the dimension, but when I stepped through the front door, I just felt like this was home. This is home. And I remember thinking, I'm so lucky to be able to purchase a home like this, or whatever, whatever the scenario is. I mean, you could throw anyone at me, but like, what did you feel? What did you think? And just pulling in that dimension of emotion and kind of pinpointing it. Another good way within it as well is just as you're trying to think through of like, okay, how do I add a little bit more heart here, is thinking through your five senses. So what was happening with your five senses as this experience happened? What did you see, or what did you hear or taste, touch, or feel as this experience was happening? That can help you kind of expand your thinking of some of the other, dimensions of what was going on there. I think one reason we don't add in heart sometimes is we're afraid of being vulnerable, because sometimes pulling in that heart kind of expresses our own shortcomings or our own failures or our own, but that is really what engages your audience to you and has them lean in. So I think, just really learning how to tell better stories and thinking through some of those experiences that happen can help pull in the heart aspect.
I have a question about coaching, and then I'm going to ask you to do some real-time coaching of a
Okay,
TED Talk.
I'm for it.
TED Talk I did a few years ago. So my sort of contextual coaching question is, without naming names, can you talk about some things with clients and speakers you've worked with where they get a little hard-headed about it? They'll listen to kind of 80% of what you say, but do you see any recurring sort of items or two where they have a cognitive bias, or they're just being difficult or stubborn, that, at night when you're talking to a friend about your day, you go, this speaker is so good, but if she could really just get over this hurdle and listen to my advice on this, it would take her to another level. So are there any common denominators with that resistance from speakers?
Yeah, and I think the most common one is not practicing before delivering it. Because I do think there's this level when you get to where you're good, where you're a good speaker, you can kind of mail it in. Like they could ask you 15 minutes ahead of time, give a speech, and you could get there, you could do a pretty good job. But so I think what happens, the barrier I see a lot of times from going from that good to truly great speaker is what I see the greats doing is they practice and they put in the time. And a lot of times good speakers they know that they know that they're kind of mailing it in can be better than most people. And so they don't do the work. I would say that's the biggest one. The next one I would say is procrastination, just waiting too long to develop the content of what it could be, content or delivery, but just waiting longer. So just not starting early enough on the content because other things come in. But I would say practice has got to be number one, because I always tell people like run it through somebody, but I think we don't do it because we procrastinated. So we don't have the content, or we feel like I'm a good speaker. I don't actually need to I don't need to run it through, but you do. I mean, and I always give the example because to me, it was frankly, one of the most inspiring moments of my career. So I was speech writing for Dave Ramsey and worked with his team of speakers. And this was 2 or 3 years, I guess it was 2 years ago now. I had helped rewrite Financial Peace University. For those not familiar with Dave Ramsey, he's a financial talk show host. He has a very popular radio program, and kind of his flagship product of the company is he has this 9-week financial education where it's, teaches you how to get out of debt and save for the future. And so he was getting ready to refilm this curriculum. And he stopped by my desk and he said, "Hey, Eva," and he grabbed a few others. "Hey, come down to help, hear me practice." Keep in mind, this is content that he has literally been delivering for 30 years. 30 years. And there are some new updates, some new stats, some new, a couple new stories, some stuff like that. But it was primarily content he's delivered for 30 years. And he talks about every day for 3 hours on his radio show. And he went down to the stage area and he practiced his content for 6 hours because he wanted to do it right. And to me, it was really humbling because sometimes it's kind of like I can kind of mail it in and do a pretty good job. Or sometimes, I just see speakers where it's like they don't put that level of intentionality. And what I see on people like Dave and others is like they're putting their time to be excellent, or they have put in the time over the years and years and years of practice and iterating and learning how to be better. But
how many people were sitting in that 6-hour practice audience?
Oh, I think there's 3 or 4 of us. I mean, it wasn't like it was a ton.
That's beautiful.
It wasn't a ton, but it was amazing because he would go through a section. He's like, I don't like the way I said that. And he'd backtrack and redo it again until he got it, and so just the attention to detail to really make sure it was great, to me was very inspiring.
That is indeed inspiring. I think particularly for speakers that are experienced, you can get sort of emotionally attached to being used to speaking in front of 200, 500, 2,000. And you go, why would I, there's such an awkwardness with inviting 2, 3, 1 person in the room and say, I'm going to kind of give this speech at you, an audience of 1, and you're going to help me make this better. That is very inspiring.
Could I add one more thing that I just thought of? So another thing, another hard-headed thing that can sometimes happen is, especially with people that have a significant experience that shaped their life or their career that they tell again and again. They have maybe been telling it the same way for 5, 10, 20, 40 years, but it might not be the most compelling way to tell it. And no one has ever told them that. And so sometimes I think it can be really hard if you've been doing something the same way for a really long time to recognize or admit, like, maybe this is not the most engaging way for my audience. And kind of, again, having that humility to go, maybe the way I've been telling my story for 20 years isn't that engaging. Maybe I should try telling it a different way and just test it out, or take a fresh angle on this story I've been telling for a long time. That would be the other one is maybe not always having the willingness to rethink how they're telling a fundamental story to their company or brand.
And we will be right back.
Hi, friends. It's Jesse Rice, co-host and producer of the podcast. Normally, you'd hear from Josh at this point, offering you the opportunity to learn more about how to launch or grow your speaking business or write and publish your book. But since I also edit the podcast, I just cut his part right out. That gives me the opportunity to do the pitching, but from the perspective of someone who is a former student of the program and someone that has benefited tremendously from the wisdom and experience and the countless practical insights that make the stage, page, and screen training program so powerful. Look, Josh isn't paying me to say this. I do it for the community service hours. My point is, and all kidding aside, as one that has truly benefited in massive, life-changing, dream-come-true kind of ways from this content I can't recommend Stage, Page, and Screen highly enough. And I really mean that. To go and learn more for yourself about making your speaking and writing dreams come true at stagepagescreen.com. That's stagepagescreen.com. Now, back to the show.
And with that, with your now coaching on how to be coachable, we're going to do something fun here in real time. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And this is a TED Talk I did a couple years ago. It's roughly 7 minutes long, but at any point, no, definitely not. At any point, feel free to ask me to pause, make fun of something I'm doing. Say, if you were doing that again, this might be more interesting. Or, ooh, that was a clever thing. That's something other people can learn from as well. All right, here we go. For sure.
Okay.
And I'll pause it. An exasperated father asked his son's high school principal what career his son should consider. I will say right here, I feel like my opening, almost always of most high-pressure speeches, ones I know are being filmed, it takes me about 2 minutes to get out of radio guy voice.
I was going to say, so you do sound a little almost red, even though I know you're not. You sound a little announcery. What is your process? Okay, here's a quick question. What is your process before you get on the stage? Do you have a series of things you do?
Well, I as a yogurt teacher, I do a lot of yogurt.
Yes.
No, I mean, typically when I go and give a keynote at a school, it's like I'm there an hour early. I can, for me, I get all the nerves are before. Once I'm 2 minutes into it, I'm good. And so I just try to self-distract before I go out there. These TEDx events, for folks that do them, these are tricky because you get there in the morning, you might watch 5, 6, 7 people talk. Mm-hmm. And so if you are an anxious personality, which I would say I'm certainly defined as that, you kind of get more anxious because, it's like, oh, my turn isn't yet. And, oh, that was so good. And the clicker, this isn't a clicker I normally use. So that's...
Well, and that can be hard. And another thing just within that, as well as what I think a lot of people don't know about TEDx talks, they think about them as being TED Talks where you have 18, 20 minutes. To your point of this being 7, a lot of these TEDx talks, you get 7 to 9 minutes, under 10, almost all of the time. And it's hard to bring in that much. But okay, so let's keep it going because we're only 19 seconds in.
Yeah, I definitely knew I had an 8-minute time allotment ahead of time, which means I planned for 6 minutes. I think this is 6 minutes of content for an 8-minute talk. All right, I'll unpause.
Can I ask a quick question before you dive back in? How do you feel about the outfit? How do you feel about the outfit you wore? Do you feel like it expresses who you are and your personality as a speaker?
This is my typical outfit, which is kind of Mr. Rogers with sneakers. And I think as you see me present a bit, you'll see sort of a playfulness, but also a thoughtfulness. And I, unless you disagree, I feel like that's congruent in this clothing option. Cool. All right, here we go. We'll unpause it. In the future. Now, his son was described by many of his teachers as lazy, distracted, and that he couldn't remember anything. So the principal replied to the father, and he said, it doesn't matter what he does, he will never amount to anything. That father's name was Herman, and that student who wouldn't amount to anything, that was his son, Albert Einstein. Now, before you and I start thinking poorly of that principal from 1895, we have to admit something. We've all been that principal. We unintentionally overlook a kid's raw and unrefined talent because that very talent tends to first bubble to the surface as an annoyance.
Okay, well, if you could pause
I'm guilty of this myself 100%.
One thing I really like about what you've done, and I tell my clients to do this all the time, and I love that you've teed in on that, is to pull a lesser known story of a famous person. So that can be a very effective storytelling technique. We talked earlier about stories, and sometimes we do have these engaging personal stories, but not all the stories you share need to be about you. But there can also get to like, and I know I say this as somebody who helps lots of people on speeches, there can kind of get some of those stories that are like used a lot. But what you're looking for is something that you did really well there is, okay, Herman, Albert, I'm starting to kind of connect Albert Einstein. Oh, I didn't know that about Albert Einstein. That's really interesting. And then one thing I did like beyond just pulling a unique angle from a well-known person was you also had that we can all be that principal. So I'm like, ooh, where are we going to go with this? And so I thought that was, I mean, you're at this point, you're not even a minute and a half in, you've already got the audience engaged.
Yeah, I feel like I'm using my time well here. I definitely... The radio guy voice is definitely annoying me. I'm like, man, I need to chill
you do
that
sound
out.
Like you do sound like you're presenting. Like the
sure.
Josh that I've been hearing today in this conversation is not the one that I'm hearing in this TED Talk.
For sure.
And it's interesting because it's interesting because you want to bring an energetic version of yourself, obviously, to a stage, but you still want to make it sound like you want everybody to have the experience of you as a speaker. If they come up to you afterwards, which of course they will, because you've just given a great presentation, but you want them to feel that the person they talk to is the same person they just saw on the stage.
Yeah. That is not happening yet in this video. I wonder if it does. I don't recall. And I wonder how much of that is. This is new content. All right, here we go. We'll unpause it.
And as a dad, I'm guilty of this myself 100%. My son will be like, hey, Dad, do you want to play Legos? And I'm like, yeah, just a minute. And then he goes and sets a 60-second timer and like stands there staring at me the entire time. I'm glad you find his persistence amusing. I find it annoying. But here's my question. What if a kid's most annoying trait is actually their biggest talent in disguise? Meaning, what if a kid's greatest asset first presents itself as a giant pain in your asset?
I don't like that moment right there. I think I set up a really poignant question. Like maybe one of the best lines of the speech. And then because I had thought of a clever joke and I couldn't let it go, I feel like I'm inserting it in a place that it derails that poignant moment. I mean, there's a great example of I can be vulnerable, but I sometimes get so uncomfortable with it, I feel the need to rescue it with a joke.
Well, and what I wanted to know there a little bit, and maybe we go deeper because again, we're only a couple minutes in, but just adding a few more details so I'm just saying, as a dad myself, I'm guilty of this. My son wants to play Legos. Well, do you just have one kid? How old's your son? So even just having given a little bit of a scope of saying, as a dad of 4 kids, yes, my life's crazy. Or as a dad of an only child, I feel the need to play with them all the time. Or as a dad of 3, does that make sense? Like just a little bit more scope. And like I have, like I said, I have a 20-month-old right now that tries to eat the Legos all the way up to 11-year-old who's like, super protective of his, Technic Lego set. But even just a little bit more. And I mean, I'm taking 10-second ad of just giving us a little bit more taste of who you are as a dad. And maybe giving your child a name. I'm sure he has one. So when my son, taking us into that moment. So when my son, who is my 7-year-old son, what's your son's name?
London.
So when my 7-year-old son, London, I really liked England in college. You could crack a joke around, maybe a joke to your point a little bit earlier, so that you don't lose that poignant part. But I do love the stickiness of your statement that you just had come out. Like that was a very good lead up and a very strong statement that you did have on a slide that we saw on the screen. And that's, one thing on slides, people tend to kind of try to do too many things with their slides. But what I've seen so far just in this is your slides have been simple and to the point without too much text on them.
Great. Here we go. Keep going.
And if that is true, how do we not make the same mistake as Einstein's principle and unintentionally overlook genius simply because it first says hello as an annoyance? Well, over the last 40 years, the Gallup Research Organization has conducted more than 2 million interviews with successful people. And an interesting commonality emerged amongst these interviews. They found that successful people identify and refine their talents so that their talents become their strengths. Now, good for those people, but the question is, then how does a kid move from annoying trait to talent to strength to success? Well, I'm going to argue it's because that kid has at least one caring adult in their life who does the following, who redirects the annoyance and cultivates the talent. Lonnie's mother was excellent at this.
Okay, let's pause
Lonnie
there for
was
just a second.
meddlesome and mischievous, always.
So one thing, a couple of things. One, slides is always a good idea to have a buffer slide that's, if you're not actively saying what's on the slide, don't have it behind you because it can be distracting, and to not have too much pop before you're there because otherwise people will read ahead. But another thing is, as you were going through those stages, with your hands, how did they go from here to there to there? You actually... you have to keep in mind anytime, like the stage is mirrored opposite of you. Does that make sense? So if you're going linear, like this phase you're born and then the phase you die, it's actually opposite to be right for your audience. Does that make sense? I said that's so confusing.
I love that. That is such a great
from the mirroring. Does that make sense from the mirroring perspective? Let's say if I'm a speaker and I'm giving the timeline of my story, I was born in a rural town in Missouri. Now I live in Nashville. Like I'm going through that. I actually from the audience's perspective need to move the stage reverse wise. Does that make sense?
Yes. Because linear would be left to right, but as I did it, it looked like right to left.
Yes. Does that make sense? But that's just something to keep in mind.
That's a brilliant catch.
It's like one of those like silent, those. So anyway, that's just one of those. But let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm super OCD, so I love that level of detail. That's great.
Well, I like nerding out. I can do it all day.
Burned down his family's home because he attempted to cook rocket fuel on the stove. As you do. Lonnie's mother, bless her, she didn't lose her cool, as you might think. She had the patience or the wherewithal or the blood alcohol level.
There's your series of 3.
To see past this. Notice that her son had a scientific curiosity. She redirected him, said, hey, it's good. Let's get you a hot plate. Why don't you take this outside somewhere more safe? Lonnie Johnson holds more than 80 patents and is the inventor of the national treasure, the Super Soaker.
Good humor.
Which is, amazingly, approaching $1 billion in sales. And with Lonnie's cut of those proceeds, he founded his own research firm, which works on inventions related to clean energy. Now, Nancy had a teacher who did this for her. Nancy, as a
here
kid,
you're going to see a series of 3 as well.
Was described as loud, opinionated, overzealous. She once hijacked the microphone at a school assembly in order to advertise this new student club that she was starting. A student club which sought to convince world leaders to participate in nuclear disarmament. Not surprisingly, no random high school kid showed up to that club. But a teacher took notice of this, that Nancy was a leader, albeit a bit overzealous, taught Nancy, hey, here's how you get people on board with your ideas, how you recruit people towards your ideas. Nancy Lublin went on to recruit thousands of volunteers for the crisis text line, which provides 24/7 crisis intervention for young people who are deeply distressed and even suicidal. They've processed more than 28 million text messages and saved countless lives. And then there's Mrs. Wilhite. She had this kid in her class. Loud, constantly disrupting, constantly talking, making everything a joke, the class clown kid. One day, Mrs. Wilhite pulls him aside, says, hey, you should sign up for speech and debate. Because I don't know if you ever thought about this, but I think you could be a gifted communicator.
Speech and debate was the best.
I will never forget when Mrs. Wilhite said those words to me. And you are listening to me speak today because she did. She didn't get annoyed by me, though she had every right to be. I was incredibly immature and sophomoric as a kid in her Spanish class. I would do annoying things like I would ask her, hey, Mrs. Wilhite, how do you say the phrase, I would earn in Spanish? Knowing full well this would force her to say aloud, yo gonorrhea.
I actually did that.
Gracias. Yet,
Can you pause it and we'll come back
Despite-
for the end because it looks like there's a minute left. So a few things. One, I do like that you pulled several examples there. You know, the Lonnie, Nancy leading up to you. Like that was great. And I did like that they weren't all science related because at first I was like, oh, we have Einstein and then we have this inventor. So I felt like your diversity of examples within that was really good.
Ooh, that's an interesting catch that it was Einstein to another sort of STEM individual. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so, but I did like you didn't stay there. Like it was like, it wasn't just genius is not just science. So I'm glad you pulled that out. As somebody who's terrible at science, I'm glad you pulled that out. A couple things, you know, that I did notice, it does feel like you don't maybe have quite as much vocal variety as you could have. Like your kind of your tone is kind of the same, a lot of it. Except for at the jokes. And just so even thinking as a speaker yourself of how could I put a little bit more vocal variety in? So maybe your teacher could have said something to you, or maybe even as you got her to say the thing in Spanish, she'd be like saying it with an eye roll, you know, like, but thinking through like vocal variety is composed of many things, right? So it's not just volume, like loud or quiet, but it can be, you know, your animation that you add in. It can be pausing. You don't have a lot of pausing in this talk. And we talked earlier, you know, you jokingly were saying you don't have any heart. You have a lot of heart in this talk. But I also think you could have probably leaned into your heart moments more throughout this talk. Like you leaned into the humor, but I felt like it's almost like, not in a fake way, but I almost would have expected you to get a little emotional of like what this teacher did for you. And we still have a minute and a half, so maybe it's coming. But up to this point, I feel like there could have been a little bit more. And to give yourself that breathing room, knowing that you probably had that tight deadline of 8 minutes, maybe you didn't need 3 examples because we'd already talked about Einstein. Maybe you should have dropped Lonnie, since it was similar again to Einstein just because it's science. I know it's not similar. They accomplish wildly different things. But so like, and you would have been the third example just to give yourself that extra 40 seconds of space to like lean in even a little bit deeper to your story.
That's great.
On it. And then another thing to keep in mind too, and I've become more aware of this lately, is filler gestures. We talk all the time as speech consultants or speakers about filler words, the like, so, and you don't have a lot of those, but you do have repetitive gestures. And so you have to keep in mind filler gestures are just those repetitive actions that you take within your talk. So for some people that's fiddling with their hair or tugging on their blazer, you kind of tend to do the same thing with your hands quite a bit as you're speaking. So even just thinking through what are my filler gestures, how can I what am I doing with my hands a little bit more? I also think that it's a little hard to tell for me just watching the video how much you move the stage. So I know on TED stages, you have to stay in the red dot. At least that's how it often is. But the way you positioned and turned your body, listeners will not see me doing this, but like you can move and like engage more of the audience just by the way you tilt and position your body. So I think you could have actually worked the stage a little bit more. And then eye contact. How did you feel like your eye contact was? Because it's hard to tell watching a video.
No idea. No idea.
And the lights can be so bright, it can be hard to know if you're even making eye contact, depending on like in a stage sitting like this. But what I do really like about what you've done so far is you've quickly moved us through a lot of stories. You've quickly moved us through a lot of examples. You have a really nice, lovely pacing of the humor integration within it, where as the audience member, we're kind of sitting on our seat of like what's going to happen next because you are amusing. And then I like the way that you did make those visuals. So for those just listening to this podcast that are later on going to watch the video, but that aren't seeing it, one of the things that Josh did was he put these photo, almost kind of like a student ID.
Correct.
He had a student
Yes.
ID of the student with the attributes, but without the name, and then the name auto loaded. But what I really liked is that one of your attributes on yours was class clown. Well, that felt really fitting at that point in the speech because like we've laughed along with you already. And so I feel like you've done a really good job on that visual side in combination with the content that you're delivering.
Yeah, I was real thoughtful about those student ID slides of showing the kid version of them, cloaking the name intentionally to reveal it at the perfect moment like a magician. And then as the name is revealed, so is the adult version. So kind of, fast forwarding for the audience, look at what this caring adult in the life of this kid did by redirecting and cultivating this annoying trait that they had.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, here we go. Final minute.
My finely tuned immaturity. She looked past it. She redirected the annoyance, and she cultivated the talent. You see, every kid needs one caring adult, like Mrs. Wilhite, in their life. An adult to be patient where others might be pestered. So when that kid in your life inevitably annoys you, let's be honest, likely in the next 24 hours. Because they're constantly getting into stuff, or they're argumentative, or they're annoying. Take a deep breath and consider in that moment that you too might just have your very own genius sitting right in front of you.
Okay, there we go.
It was good. I mean, again, 7 minutes of 750. You packed a lot of information in that time. And I always tell clients of mine that have made the TED stages like, oh, I wish you could do the part 2. And how do you, but I almost even wondered if you were giving this again, if you, because you had the recognized talents, and then cultivate it. Well, maybe it wasn't recognized, but it was but we weren't able to really get into the cultivate. When I think of cultivate, like how do you do the ongoing? And your talk was really more, the singular focus of it was really more of like recognizing it and encouraging it rather than the cultivating piece. So I wanted the part 2. So that's a good thing for you as a speaker because I want to hear, well, how do we cultivate it? How do we cultivate it in our kids? I did think that you actually kind of like there at the end, whenever you're like, hey, when you're annoyed in the next 24 hours, you could have looped back to the Lego thing with your son at the very end.
Oh, that's
so
good.
The 3 and your very last line could have been like, well, you could have even looked at your watch and said, it's time for me to go play Legos with London or something.
Nice.
Like you could have looped back to just the Legos or like in that next 24 hours when, and you could have even another humor technique. We were talking about humor techniques earlier. One way to be very funny is adding specificity. So you're very clearly talking about yourself, but because you go a little too deep down the rabbit trail. So for example, you could have used some specificity humor in there. So the next 24 hours, when a 7-year-old comes up to you and says, hey, Dad, can I put together this whatever Ninjago, Lego Ninjago 597 piece Lego set and we can do it while do blah, 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 blah. You can say yes. Like you don't even say it was you, but it's clear it's you because it was like so specific to your situation. So that would have just been a little bit of like just because it's kind of like we didn't hear it, even though it was a tiny story loop, we didn't really get to hear the story loop of you and your son.
Yes.
Did you sit down to play Legos with him? Does that make sense? So just making sure as a speaker, you always close any little bit of a story loop that you start can be really effective, even if it's just a sentence or two. But I think that could have been a really powerful closing last line. Like, well, I'm off to play Legos or something returning back to that.
I'm definitely writing that down. Because that is
so good.
That is definitely an unintentional open loop. And that is problematic in the minds of an audience. Because they're wondering.
Yeah, it can't be. And that was a really tiny one. Sometimes we've all seen speakers do it where like, you're like, well, do you still have cancer? Like you're sitting there, like, it's a big one that they didn't, like they're in the hospital waiting room and then it progresses. You're like, well, are you okay now? Like,
and then I was in the scope of the sniper rifle. And anyway, the 3 points of selling any product are.
Yeah, exactly. So just making sure you always close any story loop. But overall, I mean, it was a good job. I would say the biggest thing, and I know you've advanced a lot as a speaker since then yourself, but one of the biggest things is just really, truly leaning into looking to your authentic voice. The same Josh that we're getting right now, I want to see on the stage, and to have more of that voice, because I didn't actually feel that after the 2 minutes, your voice changed that much. Like it felt a
Correct.
little bit more presenter voice the whole time. And I know
Agreed.
you gave that one a few years back. So just continually looking forward to like finding the most authentic version of what you sound like.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. I think my two biggest critiques of that talk would be the vocal variety. There was essentially none of it. It was just sort of radio voice the whole time. And there's also this aspect of sort of the audience is being surprised, but I feel like there's something in my sort of emotional posture where it's like I'm telegraphing that I'm about to be clever, and I know I'm about to be clever. So it's almost like I feel like there's a little subtlety where I feel like I'm spoiler alerting that some cleverness is coming, and I find that a little bit off-putting. Like I would prefer to just kind of like zap them with the cleverness instead of like, here it comes, watch this, I'm excited to give you this moment of cleverness. I feel like that is more worked out in this particular story now, but I personally really see it there, and am
Well, and
like
that's
Jesse
an
was deeply
interesting
bothered by it.
That's an interesting observation as well that I would love to point out for your listeners that are in that co-presenting role. You know, there's some people that they co-present regularly, whether it's with their company, or I was working with some marriage speakers where it really is like you say this line and then they take the line. You know, you have to, especially like as hard as it is an individual, that's one of those things to really pay attention to if you're ever co-presenting with somebody, really spending your time and your focus of your, practice time on the transition points of like, okay, how are we getting from me to you in a way that doesn't feel like, and then he said, well, like where it doesn't feel that fake, energy, like you want it to be a natural piece.
Yeah, that was like an 80s beach movie, what you just did right there.
I know. There you go. It's all those
Do you
years
think
of
Dylan
speech
really
and debate.
wants to?
Yes. Yes. Jesse, anything to comment? Anything you want to roast me on?
Oh man,
with it?
Eva's so good. It's so helpful because I think that the overall impression is impressive. And so it's kind of hard to see through those things and see to some of the technical things that make it impressive and things that will allow it to breathe even more and have it be even more impactful than just impressive. And I feel like just the TEDx staging a lot of times and the lighting, and that sets you up for impressive. And then, but what can you use almost against that in order to disarm the audience a little more? But yeah, Eva, it's so fun hearing your insights because that's really.
Yeah, I could do this all day.
I certainly think that we're not caught.
Somebody actually told me I should start a podcast where I just like deconstruct people's talks. I'm like, I don't know, that could be fun. It was really fun. It was really fun in this setting. And like I said, I mean, I think, Josh, that you did an exceptional job with, you had the appropriate amount of content for the time. It did not feel rushed with it. And that's one of those biggest mistakes that people make, especially sometimes on those shorter presentations like that 8-minute TED Talk, because I'm sure as you were crafting that talk, you probably wanted to, you could have given an hour keynote on this topic. So having that discipline, having the discipline to be that focused is really good.
Yeah. I mean, I look back and I go, there's a couple wasted sentences there, but it is mostly lean and mean. If someone is speaking regularly, but they're also kind of working on maybe a second talk, do you recommend that they kind of begin to test some material in the middle of a talk, where if it doesn't go too well, they can recover because they know the beginning and the end is quite good? What are sort of those formats if we're working on something new, we can get it up in front of folks for those that are out there speaking a decent amount?
Absolutely. Well, I think what you said I think it always is knowing the audience, and also sometimes like not like it all comes with how much you're being paid for the event. But if you are, for example, doing a free event for, your friend's company, test out some new stuff. Like that's a great opportunity versus if you're being paid, $20,000 to be on the big stage, then you want to kind of be a little conscious of it. But I think sometimes yes, testing some things in the middle, or maybe at the open, or maybe in the close, can make a big difference as well. So I would say being conscious of where you're speaking, what kind of opportunities there are for you to be able to test out some stuff. Also, you can test out stuff in various ways too, as far as, okay, you're thinking about telling this funny story. Try telling it to a friend over coffee. Try telling it to your spouse the next time you're at a dinner party. Just kind of like test it out. Not in a, hey, do you mind if I give you the story from my talk? But just like in a natural conversation way, because like you guys will not believe what happened. The client, and like kind of test out and iterate and try and some of those, low stakes opportunities before you're again on a stage, especially a highly paid stage.
Anytime I test out a joke with my wife, I first send her my AV requirements so that, sort of everything is, I'm a little picky about that. I mean, we have a long-standing marriage, but, I got to have the countryman.
She has so many adapters for the different plugs and things.
That's right.
I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eva, this was super helpful. Thank you so much for coaching me. And I think a lot of folks will take aspects of your coaching of that talk and recognize aspects of their own talk or talks they're working on that they could apply it to. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks,
Very
Eva.
much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.